2 centuries before the CIA existed, the United States ran its first covert military operation. In 1812, American officials secretly raised an army of insurgents, backed them with gunboats and regular troops, and invaded Spanish Florida, all while the president publicly denied any involvement. Historians have drawn direct comparisons to the Bay of Pigs. And yet almost nobody has heard this story. They called themselves the Patriots. But they were something closer to ghosts, a phantom army operating in the grey area between official policy and outright bloodlust. To understand why the United States wanted Florida so badly, you have to understand what Florida represented in the early 1800s. Spain controlled the territory, but barely. The population of East Florida was fewer than 10,000 people, a scattered mix of Anglo settlers, Spaniards, free and enslaved black people, Greeks, and roughly 3,000 Seminoles living in the interior. Spain's grip was loose, its defenses were undermanned, and the border with Georgia was practically imaginary at this point. That border was a serious problem. East Florida had long served as a refuge for enslaved people fleeing southern plantations. The Spanish militarized young black men, trained them as militia, and gave them a stake in defending the colony. For slaveholders in Georgia, this was a massive problem. As the planter John Houston McIntosh put it, "The whole province will be the refuge of fugitive slaves, and from thence emissaries can and no doubt will be detached to bring about a revolt of the black population in the United States." Beyond the slavery question, American expansionists saw Florida as unfinished business. Henry Clay declared in 1810 his hope to see the new United States embracing not only the old 13 colonies, but the entire country west of the Mississippi, including East Florida. The appetite was there. All that was needed was something deniable. That mechanism arrived in the form of a 72-year-old Revolutionary War veteran named George Matthews. A brevet brigadier general, a 2-time governor of Georgia, and a former congressman, Matthews was, by all accounts, a hard-ass, stubborn, and not particularly concerned with diplomatic subtlety. In January 1811, President James Madison asked Congress to pass secret legislation, authorizing the United States to take temporary possession of territory adjacent to its borders east of the Perdido River. Congress complied, appropriating $100,000 for expenses as the president shall deem necessary. Madison then quietly commissioned Matthews to travel to Florida and accept any offer from local authorities to hand over Spanish territory. The key phrase was, "accept any offer." If no offer materialized, Matthews was expected to create the conditions for one. He had a blank check. By February 1811, Matthews had arrived at St. Mary's, Georgia, right on the Florida border. Over the summer, he met with John Houston McIntosh, a wealthy Georgia planter with lands on both sides of the border, and together they built the plan. They would recruit settlers and volunteers, organize them into a rebel force, have them declare independence from Spain, establish a provisional government, and then immediately transfer their territory to the United States. On paper, America's hands would be clean. The United States wouldn't be attacking Spain. It would merely be accepting a gift from a newly independent republic. The plan moved fast. By early March 1812, Matthews had assembled roughly 125 men, mostly Georgian volunteers with a handful from Tennessee and possibly a few Spanish deserters. On March 14th, this group assembled at Rose's Bluff across the river from St. Mary's and raised their standard of revolt. The flag was a striking design created by Colonel Ralph Isaacs, Matthews's aide-de-camp, a white field bearing the blue figure of a soldier charging with a bayonet, and beneath him a Latin motto, Salus Populi Lex Suprema. The safety of the people is the supreme law. 2 days later, the Patriots elected McIntosh as their leader and crossed onto Amelia Island. What happened next stripped away any pretense of independence. 9 American gunboats under Commodore Hugh Campbell formed a line in the harbor and aimed their cannons directly at the town of Fernandina. 250 regular United States troops moved in from Point Peter. The Spanish commandant, Don Justo Lopez, looked at the gunboats, looked at the approaching Patriots, and surrendered. He folded immediately. On March 17, 1812, the Patriots marched into Fernandina, hauled down the Spanish flag, and raised their own. A republic that existed for no purpose other than to be handed to the United States had just been born. The Patriots pushed south. By late March, they had established headquarters at Fort Mose, just 2 miles north of St. Augustine. Fort Mose itself carried a deep symbolic weight. Founded in 1738 as a settlement for free black people, it was the first legally sanctioned free black community in what would become the United States. Now, slaveholding insurgents were using it as their base of operations to conquer the territory. St. Augustine did not fall. The Spanish garrison held firm behind the walls of the Castillo de San Marcos, and the operation began to unravel. Word of Matthews's activities reached Washington, and the political calculation shifted. On April 4, 1812, Madison publicly repudiated Matthews, relieving him of duty. Secretary of State James Monroe disavowed the entire operation. The Ghost Army had become an embarrassment and epic failure. Matthews was furious. He set out for Washington, reportedly declaring he would be damned if he did not blow them up, meaning he would expose Madison's role in authorizing the whole affair. He never got the chance. Malaria struck him down on the journey north. George Matthews died on August 30th, 1812, his 73rd birthday, in Augusta, Georgia. He took his grievances to the grave. How convenient. Meanwhile, the situation in Florida descended into chaos. The Seminoles, who had initially been courted by Matthews, turned against the Patriots. Matthews's own black interpreter, an enslaved man named Tony Proctor, had escaped and fled to the Seminoles, confirming their worst fears about American designs on their land. In September 1812, a war party of free black militia and black maroon Seminoles attacked and destroyed Patriot storehouses at Picolata on the St. Johns River, despite the presence of 250 Georgia volunteers. Later that month, King Payne, the leading Seminole chief, was shot during a battle with Colonel Daniel Newnan's Georgia militia and died days later from his wounds. By December 1812, the Patriots had degenerated into little more than looters, accused of destroying homesteads and forcing citizens to flee. They had published a constitution signed by just 14 members, but it was a constitution for a country that controlled almost nothing. A narrow strip about 60 miles long and 15 to 20 miles wide along the coast north of St. Augustine. The end came quietly. On May 6, 1813, the US Army lowered its flag at Fernandina and crossed the St. Mary's River back into Georgia. A stubborn remnant held on. In January 1814, a man named Buckner Harris declared Fort Mitchell the capital of the Republic of East Florida. 4 months later, the Seminoles killed him. The Phantom Republic was finally dead. But here's the thing. The Ghost Army ultimately got what it wanted. The Patriot War destabilized Spanish Florida, demonstrated Spain's inability to control the territory, and set the stage for Andrew Jackson's later invasions. In 1821, Spain ceded Florida to the United States through the Adams-Onis Treaty. As one historian noted, the Patriot War accomplished one thing the War of 1812 failed to do. It brought new territory into the American Confederation. For the Seminoles and the Black Floridians who had fought to defend their homes, the Patriot War was not an isolated episode. It was the opening chapter of a 50-year conflict that would end in forced removal and devastation. What the Patriots began in 1812, the United States would finish with bayonets, broken treaties, and forced marches stretching through the 1850s. Today, Amelia Island markets itself as the Isle of 8 Flags, a charming nod to the various nations that have flown their banners over the island. One of those 8 flags is the Patriot flag, that white field with its charging soldier and its Latin promise about the safety of the people. It hangs alongside the others as a piece of colourful local history, but behind it sits a story of covert warfare, racial terror, broken promises, and the lengths to which a young nation would go to expand its borders while insisting it wasn't. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.